Hello, my beautiful souls. It's your grandma here, and today I want to share something with you that's been weighing on my heart. Before we begin, if you're new to our little family here, welcome home. And if these stories bring you comfort or wisdom, would you do grandma a favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps me reach more souls who might need these reminders. Your support means the world to me. Truly. In all my years, and trust me, there have been quite a few, I've watched so many people chase after things that glitter but leave them empty inside. Success, money, the approval of strangers, all those shiny objects that promise happiness but deliver something else entirely. This story I'm about to tell you, it's about a man who had everything the world told him he should want, and yet he was drowning in plain sight. Maybe you know someone like this. Maybe it's you. Now, I'm not saying we should all run away to farms, though. Lord knows, there's wisdom in simplicity. What I am saying is that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop performing long enough to remember who we really are underneath all the roles we play. So settle in, grab your tea or coffee, and let Grandma tell you about David Keller, a man who discovered that losing everything might just be the only way to find yourself. This is a story about coming home to who you've always been, even when home looks nothing like what you expected. David Keller owned 17 suits, each tailored to perfection. On the morning he disappeared, he chose none of them. Instead, he stood naked in his penthouse bathroom, staring at a stranger in the mirror. The stranger had his face, his body, his expensive dental work, but the eyes belonged to someone else entirely, someone tired, hollow, desperate. "Another beautiful day to make money," he whispered to his reflection, the same phrase he'd spoken every morning for 8 years. But today the words tasted like ash. His phone buzzed with the usual symphony: market alerts, meeting reminders, messages from people who knew his net worth better than his middle name. David reached for it, then stopped. What if he just didn't? The thought arrived like a stranger knocking on his door in the middle of the night. Unexpected, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. He dressed in jeans and a sweater, clothes he'd forgotten he owned. Left his phone charging on the marble countertop. His wallet lay open on the bed, credit cards fanned out like a dealer's hand. David Keller walked out of his life wearing nothing but curiosity. 6 months before his vanishing, David had been featured on the cover of Forbes, the architect of emptiness. The headline read, celebrating his revolutionary mall designs that turned dead shopping centers into thriving entertainment complexes. He'd framed the magazine, hung it in his office, smiled every time clients mentioned it. But late at night, when the champagne wore off and the congratulations faded, David would stare at that headline and wonder, had he really built something meaningful, or just gotten better at hiding the void? His success story was supposed to be inspiring. Orphaned at 12, bounced between foster homes, graduated MIT on scholarships and spite. Every achievement was revenge against a world that had written him off. Except revenge, he discovered, was a terrible foundation for a life. His assistant Maria had noticed at first. "You've been different lately," she said one afternoon, finding him staring out his office window at the city below. "Different how? Like you're watching your life instead of living it." David had laughed it off, made a joke about needing vacation, but her words burrowed deep, taking root in the dark spaces he'd learned to ignore. That night he'd Googled existential crisis at 3 a.m., then immediately cleared his browser history, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. Everything was performance: the confident handshake, the strategic pause before answering questions, the way he ordered wine at business dinners, projecting expertise he'd learned from YouTube videos. Even his apartment was a stage set: minimalist furniture arranged for maximum impact, books on architecture and philosophy he'd never read, positioned just so for video calls, a life curated for an audience that never really saw him. The breaking point came during a presentation to potential investors. Mid-sentence explaining projected returns on a shopping complex in Phoenix, David suddenly heard his own voice as if from across the room. Professional, polished, completely hollow. He built his entire identity around being impressive. But impressive to whom, and for what? That evening, instead of networking at another industry mixer, David drove to a 24-hour diner in Queens, sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, eating mediocre pie, watching people leave unguarded moments. A construction worker complained about his boss to his girlfriend. A nurse scrolled through pictures of her kids. A teenager practiced guitar chords on an unplugged electric, humming off key. None of them were performing, they were just existing. David envied them so intensely it physically hurt. The dreams began 3 weeks before he vanished. In them he was always running through endless corridors lined with mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of himself. The successful architect, the traumatized orphan, the man desperate for approval, the one slowly suffocating under the weight of his own accomplishment. In the center of the mirror maze sat a small boy, drawing in the dirt with a stick. When David finally reached him, the boy looked up with his own face, but younger, unmarked by ambition. "You're late," the boy said. "Late for what?" "For coming home." David would wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of dust in his mouth. Dr. Sanders, his therapist, called it success anxiety, a condition, she explained, affecting high achievers who'd built their identities on external validation. "You've spent so long being who you think you should be," she said during their final session, "that you've forgotten who you actually are." "What if there's nothing underneath?" David asked. "What if the performance is all there is?" Dr. Sanders leaned forward. "Then you'll finally be free to find out." That night, David sat on his balcony, looking down at the city that had made him rich and empty in equal measure. Somewhere in those lights were people having real conversations, feeling genuine emotions, living lives that belonged to them. He wanted that, desperately, impossibly. The headlines started small: local architect missing. Within hours they grew: millionaire vanishes without trace. By evening, the mystery of David Keller. Security footage showed him leaving his building cameras caught him boarding a subway heading north. Then nothing. Like he'd simply decided to stop existing. His mother, the woman who'd adopted him at 16, the only person who'd ever seen past his carefully constructed facades, issued a statement: "David was struggling with something he couldn't name. We just want him to know he's loved, wherever he is." Police found no evidence of foul play, no ransom demands, no financial irregularities, just a successful man who'd walked away from everything he'd supposedly wanted. The media loved it. Speculation ran wild. Mental breakdown, midlife crisis, secret gambling debts, witness protection. Nobody guessed the truth. David Keller had simply chosen authenticity over achievement, and authenticity, it turned out, required becoming nobody at all. Upstate New York, 90 miles from anything resembling civilization, sat a town called Millfield. Population, main industries, dairy farming and minding your own business. David arrived on a Greyhound bus, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the backpack he'd bought at the Port Authority. The bus driver looked skeptical. "You sure this is your stop? Ain't nothing here but cows and quiet." "Perfect," David said. The town consisted of one main street, a general store, a diner that served breakfast all day, and a few dozen houses scattered across rolling hills. No Starbucks, no cell towers, no Wi-Fi passwords taped to cafe window. At the diner, David ordered coffee and asked about work. "You look like office folk," said Betty, the waitress who might have been 50 or 70. "We don't get much call for spreadsheets around here. I can learn other things." Betty studied him with eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize someone running from something. "Tom Henderson's dairy farm needs help, pays minimum wage, but room and board included. You ever milk a cow? No. You afraid of getting dirty? David thought about his 17 tailored suits hanging empty in a penthouse closet. Not anymore. Farm work was meditation disguised as labor. Up at 4:30 a.m. to milk cows who didn't care about his architectural degrees or bank account. Days spent mending fences, hauling feed, learning the rhythm of seasons instead of fiscal quarters. Tom Henderson was a man of few words and infinite patience. He taught David to read weather patterns, to sense when animals were sick, to find satisfaction in work that produced something real and necessary. City folk always think farm work is simple, Tom said one evening as they watched the sun set over endless fields. Truth is, it's the most complex thing there is. Every day's different, every animal's got personality, every season teaches you something new about paying attention. David's hands, once soft from boardroom handshakes, grew cold. His body, previously maintained through expensive gym memberships, hardened from actual use. His mind, constantly buzzing with strategies and projections, slowly learned the luxury of single focus. But the dreams continued. The boy in the dirt, still drawing, still waiting. What are you drawing? David asked one night. The boy looked up, smiled, and showed him the picture. A simple house with smoke rising from the chimney, two stick figures standing in front, holding hands. Home, the boy said. David woke up crying for the first time since childhood. Winter arrived early, blanketing Millfield in silence so complete, David could hear his own thoughts for the first time in years. He'd been at the farm 6 months, long enough for the locals to stop seeing him as a curiosity and start seeing him as David, not the architect, not the success story, just a man learning to milk cows and stack hay. Tom found him one evening sitting in the barn, watching snow fall through the open doors. You running from something or towards something? Tom asked, settling beside him on a hay bale. The question surprised David with its directness. In the city, people danced around personal topics, probing indirectly for information they could use. Here, Tom just asked, I don't know the difference anymore, David said. Fair enough. Tom was quiet for a long moment. You know, I wasn't always a farmer. Used to be an accountant in Albany. Good at it too. Made decent money, had a nice apartment, impressed my parents. David looked at him in surprise. Tom seemed so naturally rooted to this land, it was impossible to imagine him anywhere else. What changed? Nothing. That was the problem. I was succeeding at a life that wasn't mine. Took me 15 years to realize I was living someone else's dream. Tom smiled. Been here 23 years now. Still the best decision I ever made. But don't you miss it? The money, the status, the performance. Tom interrupted gently. Hell no. You know what I miss? Nothing. Because this is the first life I've lived that actually belongs to me. That night, David dreamed of the boy again, but this time, instead of drawing in the dirt, the child was building something with wooden blocks, a simple structure, nothing fancy, just solid, real. Want to help? The boy asked. For the first time in the dream, David knelt down and picked up a block. Spring brought choices. David had been missing for 8 months. The searches had stopped. The headlines had moved on. Legally, he existed in a gray area, not dead, but not officially alive either. A letter arrived at the farm, forwarded through a chain of post offices from his old address, his mother's handwriting on expensive stationery. David, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know, I'm proud of you, not for your success or your money, or your buildings. I'm proud because you were brave enough to choose yourself over what the world expected. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. Come home when you're ready, we'll be here. David read the letter 17 times, then walked to the pond behind the farmhouse, and sat on the dock where he'd spent countless evenings watching the water reflect the sky. The boy from his dreams appeared beside him, not in sleep this time, but in that liminal space between memory and possibility. You ready? The boy asked. Ready for what? To stop hiding. David felt something shift inside him, like a door opening in a room he'd forgotten existed. I'm not hiding, I'm finally being myself. The boy smiled. Exactly, so why are you still acting like it's a secret? David didn't go back to his old life. Instead, he brought his new life forward. He kept working at the farm but started designing again, not shopping centers or commercial complexes, but simple structures that served actual needs. A new barn for Tom, a community center for Millfield, buildings that grew from the ground up instead of imposing themselves on the landscape. He sold his penthouse, donated most of his savings to programs for foster children, and bought a small house on the edge of town. His mother visited for Thanksgiving, spending 3 days learning to milk cows and telling anyone who'd listen how much she liked her son's new life. The media eventually found him, a feel-good story about the millionaire who chose simplicity. David agreed to one interview with one condition: no photos of his face. Why did you disappear? The reporter asked. I didn't disappear, David said, looking out at the fields where he'd learned to recognize himself. I finally showed up. The article ran with the headline, "The Architect Who Built Himself." David never read it. He was too busy living a life that actually belonged to him. 2 years after David Keller vanished from his old life, a young MBA student arrived at the farm, stressed and burnt out from her investment banking job. She'd heard about the man who'd walked away from success, and wanted to understand. David found her sitting by the pond at sunset, staring at her phone with the glazed expression he remembered all too well. Checking emails, he asked. Always, she said without looking up. I get anxiety if I don't respond within 10 minutes. David sat beside her. What would happen if you didn't respond for an hour? The world would end. Has it ever? She finally looked at him. What ended? The world. From you not checking email. She laughed despite herself. No, I guess not. Then maybe, David said gently, the world doesn't actually need you to perform quite as much as you think it does. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the water gold. Finally she asked the question David had been waiting for. How do you know if you're living your life or just playing a part? David smiled, remembering the boy in his dreams, the empty mirrors, the morning he'd chosen jeans over suits. Easy, he said. When you're living your life you stop needing an audience. The young woman turned off her phone. Above them, the first stars appeared in a sky unpolluted by city lights, and for the first time in years, she saw them clearly. Well, my dears, that's David's story. But really, it's all of our stories, isn't it? How many of us wake up each morning and put on costumes for the world? How many of us have forgotten the sound of our own authentic voice beneath all the noise we think we're supposed to make? David learned something that took me 70 plus years to figure out. You can't find yourself by becoming who everyone else wants you to be. You find yourself by having the courage to disappoint people who never really knew you in the first place. Now, I'm not telling you to abandon your responsibilities or run away to a farm, though if that's calling to you, honey, listen to that voice. What I am telling you is this: start small. Find moments in your day when you can drop the performance. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, who am I when nobody's watching? The answer might surprise you. It might even save you. Remember, my beautiful souls, you were born to be yourself, not a more impressive version of someone else's idea of who you should be. The world needs your authentic self, not your perfect performance. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to follow along for more stories and wisdom. We're building a beautiful community here of souls who believe in living authentically. Until next time, this is your grandma reminding you, you are enough, exactly as you are. You always have been. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. With all my love.